Hollywood entered the early 2000s in constant motion. New posters, new faces, louder campaigns. Yet, inside those frames, there was a silence that felt deliberate. Demi Moore, once the gravitational center of 1,990 seconds box offices, was no longer there. The paradox is this: there was no public collapse, no headline scandal, no dramatic fall from grace, just absence. A woman who had dominated theaters, who in 1995 became the highest-paid actress in Hollywood, quietly slipped out of the studio spotlight. Her name faded from marquee posters, even as her performances remained fixed in the collective memory of a generation. So what changed? Did Hollywood gently move on, replacing one icon with the next? Or did Demi Moore choose to step out of the frame herself before the system could decide when and how she would be seen? From the beginning of her ascent, Demi Moore was assigned a very specific identity by Hollywood. She was framed as the definitive female lead of the 1,990 seconds, an image carefully balanced between sensuality, emotional accessibility, and undeniable box office power. She wasn't positioned as an auteur actress shaping the language of cinema, but as a star whose presence could anchor expensive studio projects. This role came with invisible boundaries. Demi Moore was expected to be bold, but never disruptive. Strong, but still emotionally legible within male-centered narratives. Her characters often existed as the emotional core of stories driven by men, reinforcing a system that rewarded visibility as long as it remained controllable. Films like Ghost cemented her image as the empathetic, romantic center, gentle, vulnerable, universally relatable. In A Few Good Men, she embodied professional strength, yet still operated within a hierarchy dominated by male authority. Indecent Proposal pushed controversy, but only as far as social morality allowed it to be safely debated. With Ghost earning over $500 million worldwide, Demi Moore became inseparable from high-budget studio success. She thrived because she played the role Hollywood needed. But that role, carefully cast, carefully contained, was never the full measure of who she was. The rupture between Hollywood and Demi Moore did not happen because she chose the wrong film. It happened because she chose control. For the first time, Demi Moore stopped being a star shaped by casting rooms and began acting as someone who defined her own image, body, and authority. The turning point came in the mid-1,990 seconds, when she made a series of decisions that openly challenged the unwritten rules for female stardom. Striptease was framed by the media as a scandal about nudity, but the deeper issue was power. Moore did not appear as an object being consumed. She presented a woman who owned her sexuality and demanded compensation for it. With a reported salary of around $12.5 million, she became a visible symbol of female financial leverage in an industry deeply uncomfortable with it. 1 year later, she pushed even further with G.I. Jane, shaving her head and portraying a woman attempting to survive elite military training. Moore deliberately erased the visual markers that Hollywood relied on to sell her. This was not a strong but glamorous role. It was confrontational, physical, and deliberately unmarketable within traditional expectations of femininity. Taken together, these choices signaled something unsettling to the system. Demi Moore was no longer playing by the rules of the female movie star rules that allowed boldness only when it remained attractive, contained, and easily replaceable. She rejected softness. She rejected likability as a requirement. And, most critically, she rejected the idea that her value depended on remaining visually pleasing. Hollywood's reaction was subtle but swift. The language surrounding her shifted. What had once been praised as bold began to be described as too much. What was once iconic became problematic. Media coverage narrowed its focus to box office numbers, her appearance, and her age, while largely ignoring artistic intention or cultural context. The system did not ban Demi Moore, nor did it push her off a cliff. Instead, it rewrote the narrative. She had gone too far. Male actors who took comparable risks were reframed as daring or visionary. A woman who did the same was quietly marked as expendable. Demi Moore did not fail overnight, but in stepping outside the role Hollywood had written for her, she cracked the frame itself, and that fracture would never fully close. What followed Demi Moore's defiance was not outrage, nor an official backlash. It was something far more effective: silence. Hollywood did not announce that it was done with her. It simply stopped calling. There were no press releases declaring her difficult, no blacklist, no scandal to justify the shift. Instead, the response unfolded quietly. Fewer scripts arrived. The offers that did come were smaller, safer, less central. Her name drifted away from the top of posters and billing lines, even as the industry continued to move forward without pause. After G.I. Jane 1997, the pattern became clear. The large, studio-led roles that had once defined her career began to thin out. Demi Moore did not disappear entirely, but her presence changed shape. She moved toward supporting roles, occasional independent projects, and sporadic appearances, rather than sustained leading parts. The machine did not eject her. It simply repositioned her outside its core. The media followed suit. Long-form interviews became rare. Major publicity campaigns no longer revolved around her image. Where Demi Moore had once been treated as a cultural event, she was now discussed in the past tense. The narrative quietly shifted from relevance to legacy. Behind that silence was an unspoken judgment. She was labeled never formally, but persistently as difficult, out of sync with the market, or simply a star of another era. Age, once irrelevant to her male peers, became a defining factor in how she was framed. What had never been questioned for men was suddenly used to explain why a woman no longer belonged at the center. This transition did not hinge on a single box office disaster. There was no catastrophic failure to point to, no definitive moment of collapse. Instead, it was a sequence of small closures, doors shutting softly but repeatedly. Each decision, taken alone, appeared reasonable. Together, they formed a pattern of exclusion. The broader industry context mattered. By the late 1992s and early 2000s, Hollywood was pivoting toward younger female stars who fit more comfortably within familiar expectations. Demi Moore, having refused to remain predictable or easily managed, no longer aligned with that shift. What makes the silent response so powerful is its deniability. Demi Moore was never publicly rejected. She was simply placed outside the frame. The camera kept rolling. Hollywood continued telling stories, but she was no longer in the shot, and no one felt the need to explain why. The version of events most people heard about Demi Moore was simple, efficient, and reassuring for the system that told it. Demi Moore, the story went, had sabotaged her own career. She chose the wrong roles. She overreached. After her peak, she simply became irrelevant. The language repeated itself across headlines and commentary. Box office decline, overpaid actress, a star who faded. Complex shifts were reduced to a single explanation: failure. The narrative was neat, digestible, and easy to accept. What this story quietly erased was context. Gender was removed from the equation. So was the double standard applied to artistic risk. The same industry that celebrated male actors for radical transformations reframed similar choices by a woman as career-ending mistakes. Her decisions were not analyzed as challenges to power, but as miscalculations. Missing entirely was any serious acknowledgement of what Demi Moore had represented. She had once reshaped the financial and symbolic power of women in commercial Hollywood. Her shaved head in G.I. Jane was not a gimmick, but a visual and political refusal of how femininity was expected to look on screen. Yet none of this fit neatly into a failure narrative. By focusing narrowly on individual box office results rather than the arc of a career, the media avoided harder questions. Calling it a fall from grace allowed Hollywood to move on without self-examination. The story we were told was clean and complete, but it was also incomplete, too small to fill the empty frame it claimed to explain. Away from the center of the studio system, Demi Moore did not vanish. She chose a different form of presence. Rather than fighting to reclaim the spotlight or staging a high-profile comeback, she stepped into a quieter, more controlled relationship with her work. Her career shifted from visibility to selectivity. Demi Moore continued acting, but on her own terms, choosing projects carefully, appearing in independent films, television, and smaller roles that did not demand constant reinvention for public approval. She also moved into producing and behind-the-scenes work, reshaping her connection to the industry from within rather than from its front lines. This new rhythm extended into her personal life. As the mother of 3 daughters, her priorities moved decisively away from spectacle. Family, health, and privacy took precedence over maintaining a public persona. Her relationships were no longer framed as headlines or branding opportunities, but as parts of a life no longer organized around visibility. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, her appearances were sparse but intentional. There was no orchestrated campaign to restore former glory, no aggressive narrative of redemption. Instead, there was continuity, quiet, steady, and deliberate. Demi Moore was not erased. She redefined what it meant to exist as an artist. Success was no longer measured by posters or box office totals, but by autonomy. Outside the frame, there were no spotlights and no leading roles. But there was something Hollywood rarely allows, a life that belonged to her. In the end, the story of Demi Moore does not ask for a verdict. It asks for a definition. When is a career truly successful? Is it measured by constant visibility, remaining in the spotlight, returning again and again to be remembered, securing a comeback validated by headlines and box office numbers? Or is success something quieter? The ability to step out of the frame on one's own terms, to refuse playing a role that no longer fits, to exist beyond the narrative Hollywood insists on telling. The paradox of Demi Moore is this. She disappeared from the center of the industry, yet she never vanished from the memory of 1,990 seconds cinema. She left the spotlight, but not the conversation, especially the ongoing reckoning around power, gender, and control. So what did she lose? A box office empire? Or did she keep something rarer, the right to walk away while the choice was still hers?